The following program was made possible by the generosity of those who have determined to hold fast to the true Roman Catholic religion, as expounded by the Roman Catholic Church before the disasters of Vatican II and the so-called New Mass.
Hello and welcome to What Catholics Believe. I'm your host, Thomas Nagley, and with me tonight is Father William Jenkins. He's a member of the Society of St. Pius V. He's also the pastor of Immaculate Conception Church right here in Norwood, Ohio. Hello, Father. How are you?
Very fine, Tom. Thank you. Yourself?
Doing well. Thanks for being here.
Sir.
Joining Father Jenkins and myself tonight, as promised, is Mr. Tom Condit. He has been on the program previously. We promised him to appear in our most recent program. So, Mr. Condit, welcome to the program.
Always an honor to be back.
Good to you. Well, Mr. Condit, I'll start with you as our guest. Father Jenkins and I, in our most recent program, we discussed this House Resolution 6666 bill. And so I would like to get your take on this. Father Jenkins and I, like I said, we spent some time discussing this. I believe we've all read through it. In your profession as a lawyer, what is your legal perspective on this bill, the HR 6666?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy it's not very long.
Yeah.
Because Congress can really pump out some long, unreadable stuff. But so this is a relatively small piece of work. My first take on it is that it's got the kind of nebulous phrasing here and there that's, is where all the mischief would lie. Let me just read, if I may, the first, just a few little pieces. So it starts off saying it's to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities, which are defined later, to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related activities. What does that mean? Such as contact tracing, which itself is a huge problem for any free-thinking people. Okay, and related activities such as contact tracing through mobile health units and as necessary at individual residences and for other purposes. So first, who decides what's necessary? At individual residence, that potentially is a real big problem if you're not perfectly welcome there. And for other purposes. What does that mean? So right, the door is just flung wide open now for when someone deems it's necessary to come to your homes for that and other purposes. The other thing, some definitions starts off section 2. Again, may award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 to trace and monitor the contacts of infected individuals and to support the quarantine of such contacts through, and then it lists mobile health units and some other ways they would do that. So when I first read this, my first reaction was, if you think that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are public servants, then you'll love this, because they are here to support you. They're here to support your quarantine. It's not designed as something that's going to be mandated or oppressive. They're here to support your quarantine. So I think it's just the kind of language that I always shudder, and I think that once this gets in the hands of, once this passes, and then they can appoint bureaucrats to enforce it, and then judges can interpret it, this can go anywhere.
Does it concern you that we have a Democratic sponsor and about 58 Democratic co-sponsors? But there was one Republican who signed on but then canceled. I mean, the fact that this is a Democratic-led initiative, is that a concern as far as how they would tend to interpret these words?
Well, in the end, I don't think it's going to come down to how the legislators interpret them. The interpretations are going to go on somewhere else. Like I said, either by the agencies that are empowered to implement this, or the judges who hear disputes over it.
What is intended by this, then?
But sure, the intentions look, anything initiated all by Democrats is always a concern. I mean, they're just so. I think it's an indicator of what the motives are behind this. That you can easily understand when you see it's from 57 Democrats instead of 57 Republicans. I think right away you know the motives will be different as a general rule. But I look at the language and how it will be implemented by people other than the legislators.
I see.
And it can go in any possible direction here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I understand it, this is going to be at the discretion of the Department of Health and Human Services. Is that right? The Secretary of Health and Human Services, right?
Right. Well, at its core, it's a funding bill. Mm-hmm. At its core, it says they may award grants to eligible entities and to do all of these things. So in the end, it's going to be the discretion of the state governments and maybe the federal to just start giving money to people to, kind of a related thing I saw where the governor of Washington has a big crew of people in place to be contact tracers. Maybe 30,000. I mean,
really,
a whole bunch of people are already, I guess, employed or lined up to play this role of following people.
Could you explain what that is? That role is of contact tracing.
Contact tracing, as I understand
that's
it.
what this is.
Yes, that is
centering on.
Yeah, as I understand it, that when you are, of course, again, you've got different governors taking it in different directions. But my basic understanding is when someone is found to be infected, or maybe even just with someone who's been infected, they will then follow you. They will, if not physically follow you through electronics and your phone and things like that. They know where you've been. They know, and this is now this is the kind of stuff that always was just like the classic characterization of the ultimate communist country. Just clamping down. Mm-hmm. And so contact tracing, a term I never heard 3 weeks ago, is taking root and just flying now.
And you say that they have all of these individuals, these 30,000 something individuals ready to go. Does that mean they are anticipating the passage of this bill?
No, this is in the state of Washington. So now what we're looking at here is, if passed, would be a federal law.
Okay.
I used the state of Washington as an analogy. That governor already has contact tracing going in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
From what I understand. So
my understanding is that if anyone is found to have the COVID-19 virus, that anybody who is in contact with those persons socially for a previous day, 2 weeks perhaps, they have to be discovered and they have to be tracked down. Anyone who's been associated with that, at the supermarket or wherever else, right? So it could include quite a group of people, right?
Well, it could, and it really has them just following all of your associates. Who are you associating with? Again, the reason I don't want to speak too definitively, because in just the things I've read kind of quickly here and there, different governors, different places, different advocates are saying different things about what may or may not happen. So I don't want to be inaccurate, but that certainly is the sense I get, is that they're going to be monitoring you, your friends, who you've been with, where you've been, and they got a big army ready to do that work for them.
Wow.
Well, $100 billion, at least for the rest of this year, spread over, let's say, however many months it takes is left in this year after this passes, right? Basically, they're dedicating $100 billion to the rest of this year whenever this goes into effect.
Right.
So that could certainly get a lot of domestic spies on the payroll, right?
It sure could.
Why do you think that there's so much kind of vague language in this bill? Like you said, these kind of nebulous implications for some of this language in here. Is that typical of bills that we see today? Do you think that there is?
I think it is. I think a lot of it is the legislators are lazy.
Really?
They're lazy. It takes hard work to write things with precision. Mm-hmm. And I think they're lazy because they want to, first of all, a lot of them are doing it for politics. They want to say, I introduced this bill. And they'll characterize it in ways that flatter themselves. And, it's always stuck in my mind is what someone said about the the Americans with Disabilities Act, which passed in 1991. I was right out of law school and I was reading about it. And somebody made the very point, I don't know if he called them lazy, but in essence, the author did, because he said they're basically, some of the phrases were so vague and arguable that what the legislators were really doing is, okay, politically we want to get this through to assist the disabled and to pat ourselves on the back. And ultimately, we know the judges are going to be the ones deciding what this means. We know there's going to be lawsuits over this, and employers needing to know, am I violating this act if I don't provide this or that to a disabled worker, or the worker suing the employer? The judges are going to, the legislators throw it out there really unfinished, and the judges are going to be the ones that decide what it means.
And
that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I can speak to that bill myself on a firsthand basis. I have a degree in sign language interpreting, and that the ADA played a big role in the legal aspects of sign language interpreting. And I remember quite frequently throughout my college courses there was a significant amount of discussion surrounding this ADA because it was so vague. There would be things like businesses are required to provide reasonable service,
reasonable accommodations,
and I remember at one point we even had a class that focused specifically on legality and deafness and interpreting and legal issues. And for one of our projects, we had to go to different businesses and kind of see if they were complying with this ADA Act. And across the board, I mean, there was absolutely no semblance whatsoever of compliance with this ADA. Just because it, like you said, so incredibly nebulous, so vague.
Right, and that's why people call laws like that the Lawyer Full Employment Act.
Yeah, and that just on a
the lawyers call it that.
Well, lawyers and people who don't like lawyers call it that.
Yeah. Just speaking in general, though, I mean, this doesn't seem to be good legal work because it seems to create so many problems when you have things that are just so incredibly vague. You know, things like we talked about the funding, how such sums as may be necessary for the following fiscal years, related services, things like that. That's not good legal work, is it? Wouldn't that just create more problems than it's trying to solve?
It would, and I think you'd see a lot less. I think the courts would be less busy if the legislators wouldn't be so lazy.
Really?
I mean, define what you're putting into law. Define it.
Yeah.
Don't throw out 4 vague phrases that everyone's going to be arguing the first week what it means.
Do you think there could be a more nefarious purpose than laziness, though? Do you think that they kind of purposely left things vague so that they can essentially...
Well, not that I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Of course not.
Yes. I mean, I personally think the minds of legislators are, some of them, the leftists. If we can get this in the door, if we can just get it through, then all... I once represented a group of people up in a city near Dayton, Ohio, in a challenge on a number of constitutional things, and one of them was an old pastor of a Protestant church, a bit of a character and an enjoyable guy to talk to. He said a line which I thought was so funny and so true. He said, a conservative is someone who reads old newspaper clippings. And the point is, and I know this happened through the years, that if you go back, I forget which one it was, maybe it was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where the proponents of it said, oh, no, this will never be used to do that. And of course, 20 years later, that's exactly what was happening. So I think when they write and leave the barn door open, so to speak, with these vague phrases, I think a lot of them have every motivation that that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, that's what the fact checkers are saying about this now. When people are raising objections now about this, the fact checkers are coming out saying, no, it doesn't say that. Where are you getting this?
Yes. Yeah.
No, it couldn't possibly be interpreted that way. But of course, they have their own agenda, don't they? But what about the title of our last program, Mr. Condit, was said something about the health care SWAT teams coming to your door, or something to that effect. Was that an overstatement, do you think?
Oh, probably not. I mean, I can see left to some governors the way they've exhibited themselves here in the last month. I can see. I mean, clearly this anticipates them coming to your door. It's right there to your residences as necessary. It doesn't say who invites them or who determines, and therefore, if they know, if the contact tracers say, okay, so-and-so down there on Elm Street was with Jones over on Vine Street, and we know Jones has the virus, we better go down to Elm Street and visit them and see. Absolutely, I could see that kind of stuff coming out of this.
Wow. What do you foresee happening with this bill?
If you want my political prediction, I think it never gets out. I think the Senate, a Republican Senate will understand the suicide of I mean, Republicans aren't always that bright, as we know. But I don't think it'll get out of the Senate. My guess is Trump would veto it if it did, maybe.
Sure.
I think the chances of becoming law are probably, politically, are probably not very good.
But the Democrats who are sponsoring this must realize that even better than you. So what would their purpose be? Are they trying to send a signal to somebody?
I don't get in the mind of a Democrat.
What would they tend to gain from this? Say, look, we tried to bring the support, and the Republicans wouldn't let us.
I can see that. I mean, I can see that.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Condit, on a more general, widespread view of things, how do you view everything that's been happening with the I think just speaking before the program, I think you used the word crazy, just with everything that's going on with the lockdowns, the restrictions, the stay-at-home orders, and all of that has been in place. I know we were just kind of laughing before the program about this story of Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers quarterback, how he, during the offseason, had grown quite the impressive head of hair, full beard and everything, and now I guess they are, his team is starting some practicing drills, and there was video of him with a nicely shaved head, very trimmed beard, and it turns out that he had gone to some barber in town, and the governor of Pennsylvania actually spoke out very, very harshly against this. I have a quote of his here. He said that anybody who puts himself or herself into harm's way is something that I think we ought to try to avoid. I said, when you go to something like a barber shop and you're not protected, I don't care who you are. The chances of that virus actually wreaking havoc on your life increases. I don't personally think any Pennsylvanian ought to take that chance, and I certainly don't want to take that chance myself. You think the governor of Pennsylvania is being reasonable here?
That's literally a hysterical statement. That's a hysterical statement. Guy went and got a haircut, obviously from someone he knew, you assume, and I mean, listen to that. Putting himself in harm's way and
getting a haircut,
wreaking havoc on his life. This is bizarre. This shows that, this isn't like, oh, the wacky governor of such and such a state. This is like dozens of governors now.
Yeah.
And so I think it portends very poorly for.
You used the word crazy before, and I've referred to the psychotic states of America right now. Because we not only have the politicians saying psychotic things, right? But then law enforcement trying to enforce what they're being ordered to do can do things that, I mean, I'm not a psychologist or not, but just reading the description of psychosis, it seems that they're doing psychotic things in trying to enforce what these governors or I should say perhaps the health directors of the various states are doing, right? Commanding, what they're mandating, okay? It's just incredible how much power they have, though, according to the state regulations, right? How much these health commissioners, commissars, whatever you want to call them, how much power they have over the entire population of the state. Now, you're somewhat familiar with the revised code of the state of Ohio, I imagine. I'm sure you are. And you saw that the order came out originally mandating the stay-at-home policy here, right, in Ohio. And it referred to a certain section of the code, right? That seems awfully broadly written. So that there's a woman by the name of Amy Acton,
Right.
Dr. Amy Acton, whom our own Michael DeWine, the governor, put in power, right? One of the first things she did when she had that power was abuse it, at least in my book, by overriding all of the government investigation that was going on about an abortionist, and she simply, motu proprio, gave him a license to operate, right? Despite all of the problems, legal problems involved there, she simply gave it to him. And now she's basically almost dictating the lives of the people in Ohio right now, right? Who's essential, who's not, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, what do you make of this? Maybe I'm asking you too broad a question.
Well,
too
yeah, and
much.
don't assume any lawyer is too familiar with the Ohio Revised Code from beginning to end, because it's always changing. But I do know that the statute in Ohio gives a lot of power, gives some specific power in specific emergency situations to the health director, which is why apparently she signs orders and the governor doesn't. So there's a legal basis for that, if I understand it correctly. But look, this is a problem of the whole bureaucratic state. I mean, people that no one voted for are, and so you got to say, this goes back to Governor DeWine. If he's going to appoint someone like that, and look, he's at press conferences every day or multiple times a week just backing this up 100%, so it's on him. But legally, she's been empowered by what's in the Ohio Revised Code.
But the state legislature is challenging that, right?
I believe
Trying
they
to limit her.
Yes, I believe they just went into session to try to pass something to limit her.
But he says he will not let them do that, right? He's going to veto that legislation, even of his own Republican majority House here.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Really?
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me. I think this governor in Ohio, I know we're talking to a broad audience around the world, but the governor of Ohio, I don't think has ever been as conservative as he's a Catholic with 8 children and lost one in a tragic car accident years ago. And so he's always had the image of a good family man, and I don't want to cast aspersions on that. But politically in office, I don't think he's ever been as conservative as his image is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful because at least there's always been that recognition that churches have the right, the constitutional right to function. And that has been respected here in the state of Ohio, largely, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been telling people I'm just very grateful that I'm not in the People's Republic of China, I'm not in Great Britain, I'm not in Kentucky, and I'm not in Michigan. Not necessarily in that order either. But I'm grateful that I'm in Ohio. And a lot of it comes down to Governor DeWine, having that respect for the Constitution. So I appreciate that very much. But there's this dichotomy. There's even a contradiction going on here that is very worrisome.
Right. Mr. Condit, what do you think of these some protests that have been going on against Governor DeWine and I guess Dr. Acton, where, I mean, like Father Jenkins said, they have, from our Catholic perspective, definitely very good thing that they have recognized our right. They even labeled churches and religious services as essential services. So they have recognized that right. We really haven't been impeded in our worship here at church in any way. So what do you make of these protests that have been occurring?
Let me circle to that by first saying I think a lot of credit goes to Governor Abbott of Texas, because he was the first one, as I understand it, to come forward and say in Texas religious are essential services. And I quite frankly wonder how Governor DeWine in Ohio would have handled it if, to me, Governor Abbott threw down the gauntlet to every other governor. So God bless him.
In Amy Acton's initial order, religious organizations and groups were listed as E under this long list. So they were not toward the bottom of the list; they were toward the top of the list as being essential services.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's good to know.
Again, I give them the credit for that.
Right. So
But nonetheless, I mean, so many of them closed down. The rest were being pressured. We were being pressured too.
We sure were.
As it was made very clear to me by the health officials, they really wanted us to close our doors. They really, really wanted us to close doors. And there was social pressure from the neighborhood too, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Well, and Governor DeWine, Governor DeWine made the statement within a week or two after saying that churches are exempt from the shutdown, basically saying it was so dangerous, it was unchristian to go to church, which was just
it was unchristian.
Yeah.
But to put people at risk.
Yeah. So at a minimum, there were really some bad mixed messages coming out of Columbus, Ohio.
At one point, I had the impression he was inviting the community to intervene, to take the law into their own hands. I would like to think he would never consciously do that, but.
Well, then we had the county prosecutor here in Hamilton County, Ohio, come out with a statement in response to some private citizens being a little bit uppity, maybe, about not social distancing. He expanded and targeted the church with his comments, saying, if I was governor, the first people at church on Sunday would be the National Guard.
Wow.
Right.
And an astounding comment from a
public official.
And
he is elected.
Someone who fashions himself as a conservative, and indeed who went to the same high school I did, to come out and say the first people at church, if I was governor, would be the National Guard. Wow, what are these guys thinking? What's happening to them?
Wow. I think it just came out today, actually, that this stay-at-home order that Governor DeWine had in place here in Ohio, it has been rescinded and changed to a strong recommendation. I found that rather surprising. Has there been times before where our governors have kind of talked about all of these strong kind of suggestions versus an actual order?
Well, I can tell you, other than going away to college for a while, I've been in Ohio my whole life, and I don't ever, doesn't matter where I was outside of Ohio, I don't ever remember anything like this happening in my whole life.
Yeah.
This is, Father Jenkins, you're in my generation, let's say. Can you recall anything like
I'm fine.
Can you recall?
I certainly don't, no.
No, this is unprecedented.
But I don't recall the health director has been, crowned
Right.
vice regent or vice gerent to the government of Ohio or anywhere else for that matter. The matter of the church and religious worship, what came to mind when I heard about all this coming down the pike here was what Albert Einstein said when he saw the Nazis rise to power in Germany. He said at first he thought that the universities would oppose the Nazis, and then he saw that they all caved in. And then he thought the press would stand up and oppose the Nazis. And he says they all began to kowtow to the Nazis. They all caved in. He said the only institution that stood up was the church. Right? And then, what did we see this time? They all folded, right? Starting with Francis, right? And starting with Rome, right? And then all the way throughout the country, they all just folded right out.
Right.
So willingly, so readily, without a whimper, it seemed. That's scary. It's a scary thought.
It is. I was just floored when I saw that without any government, there wasn't even really a push from the government yet, and they just shut it down.
But I think, Father, now some of the Novus Ordo churches are beginning to kind of slowly open back up, and there's a lot of protocol that I guess is being enforced. I don't know to what extent it's being enforced. But what do you think about that, Father? I know here in our Church Immaculate Conception, we still have some of the original protocol that you introduced when this all first came about. What do you think about all this protocol being mandated in these Novus Ordo churches? To what extent is it being mandated, and do you think that is a good idea?
Well, Tom, that's an interesting question, because since those churches were all closed down all this time, I mean, their activities were extremely limited. You heard about priests going out with squirt guns and squirting people with squirt guns, holy water and squirt
Holy
guns.
water.
And priests social distancing, hearing confessions as people drove up and went to confession, and there was a folding chair there, and would give them absolution. This is the Novus Ordo now, but actually anything going on inside the church, streng verboten, right? Absolutely forbidden. Now that they're opening up now, they find that they are being required to accept protocols that were every bit as stringent as what we did ourselves. We just took this upon ourselves, thinking, okay, well, if they're concerned about these things, we'll meet their concerns, and we'll show that this is that important to us, and they're not going to stop us. They're just not going to stop us from practicing our faith. And if we have to go out of our way to do this, we'll go out of our way to do this. I'm thinking what our Lord did to give us the Mass and the sacraments, and what so many, the early Christians did, especially the martyrs, to have the practice of their faith. And this is nothing in comparison. Washing your hands with sanitizer when you come to the church, that's nothing in comparison with what our ancestors of the faith had to endure. And all we're going to be showing by this is how important that is to us. And okay, fine. We'll go along with this somewhat. But see, I was quite convinced, and I still am convinced, that this is a real virus out here, that there is a real SARS-CoV-2 or a COVID-19, that this is a real coronavirus. I happen to believe, from what I've been reading, that it was designed, okay? It was part of the gain-of-function experiments that were going on. Actually, after they were forbidden in this country, they were carrying on in Wuhan in China, in their Bio4 lab, with, of all things, $3.7 million that was funneled to them by Anthony Fauci, right?
Yeah.
If this is true, we paid for this, we paid for this virus. I happen to believe that's true. I don't know if there's a way to prove it one way or the other, but I happen to believe that that's exactly what happened. But in any case, I'm still convinced that this is a real virus. I'm convinced that they're artificially inflating the danger of the virus, though. I'm convinced they're artificially inflating it because the leftists want to use it to drive this through. And I don't think I'm just being gratuitous about this. It's not just a matter of just the leftist mentality in general. The idea of using a crisis, creating a crisis, and then using it. But when George Soros comes out publicly and says, this is a wonderful opportunity. We have an opportunity to do more things we could never even dreamed about accomplishing before. We now have the opportunity to do this, to accomplish this because of COVID-19. George Soros comes out publicly and announces this to the world. What does that tell anyone who has ears to hear and ears to hear and eyes to see? What the leftists are actually up to here. So I believe this is a virus, and it is killing people, and it's killing people in a very horrible way. Evidently, it does something to the blood, which affects the blood's ability to carry oxygen to the body. It's an awful thing. But I do believe that they are exaggerating this in the hopes of ramping up fear so that they can control people. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I still do believe that we have to take precautions. I really do. I think the precautions are common sense. So here we are. Okay, the other churches are coming out of hibernation now. And we're being told by the governors, this is the most dangerous time of all now, when we're going to start the second wave of the virus. So this is when we have to impose all of these rules and regulations you have to follow in your newly opened churches. This is the time when we, after 5 or 6 weeks of this, are getting really tired of this and really want to stop doing this. I don't know if this transition time is the time for us to drop all of that and say, okay, now that they're back online, the other churches, they're picking up on all this, and I think they're taking it very seriously, actually, and I think they're being watched closely. Mm-hmm. Even if the local constabulary weren't watching them very closely, there'd be people in those churches watching them and reporting them very carefully to make sure they're following exactly the line. But I think we have reasons of our own for still maintaining a certain cautionary attitude about all this, even apart from government involvement. I think we have to be careful with prudence that is just dictated by common sense when you have an actual microbe out there. Believe me, I do not believe all these reports about how dangerous this thing is in comparison with any other disease the world has ever known. I don't believe that. Okay? I don't believe the reports, the studies that say this is 13 times more deadly than the flu. Then what flu? I mean, you have all kinds of different flus. These reports keep coming out, and they are, one is more nonsensical than the other. One is more hysterical than the other. I do believe that this is a real virus, though, and we have to be careful.
Can I pick up on that for a minute? I just brought a couple of things. The internet, of course, is loaded with a lot of stuff and a lot of good stuff. I just came. There's two I printed off that I just found pertinent to this thing. How I've been saying now for months. I think the virus is real. The crisis is not. This is what as the data came out, it was clear. So two things quickly. Here's a piece. I don't know what the website is, but the author is Brittany Hughes. And it's titled "Last Year's Flu Season Was the Deadliest in 4 Decades, but Prompted 0 Shutdowns." And she just picking some pieces. Last year's flu season was the deadliest since 1976, with far more fatalities than the 56,000 who died in 2011 and 12. Now the flu season, I guess, is September. About a 5-month period. They considered October to March or something like that. November to March, maybe. Right. In addition, more than 900,000 people were hospitalized with the flu last year alone. Among those lost to the flu last year were 180 children, a record high for a non-pandemic flu season. It says there were 3, normally it's regional and then it spreads. They said there was 3 consecutive weeks when the entire continental U.S. was affected by flu at a very high level. Concluding, she said, despite the high prevalence of flu cases, the record number of fatalities both among adults and children, and the concentrated outbreak across a short window of time, no economic shutdowns, social distancing mandates, or store closures were mandated as a result of that seasonal flu. I mean, I think it really is important reacting politically and as a population.
Well, it has to make that distinction.
Yeah, it has to be. Now, the other one I want to point out, this is written by a guy who's done a number of good pieces. His name is David Horowitz with Conservative Review. And this was just a day or two ago. The title was, "We Have Been Lied to, 6 Facts That Change Everything We Know About the SARS-CoV-2 Virus." These are just the 6 categories, and he backs it up with some data and some references. Number 1, the shocking inflation of the COVID-19 death numbers. And we know from various sources that they're just loading up the numbers, which were not caused by the virus. 2, states with longer lockdowns had worse results. 3, outside nursing homes, the fatality rate never warranted such action, even if it would work. 4, outside New York, this is barely worse than a bad flu season. 5, excess deaths are from lockdowns, not the virus. And there is apparently a fair bit of anecdotal evidence of people dying at home because they won't go to the hospital of other maladies. And then 6, and I'd heard this from another source and thought it was a joke, but I never knew this. Apparently this is factual. Social distancing was invented by a high school kid and politicians, not scientists. And the specific data explanation he gives for that, the print is so small here, I can't really try to read it the way it printed off my computer. But he made the point that back in 2006, it came out of a high school sociology paper, and it was mocked by the epidemiologists.
Really?
Now it is absolutely essential. It's part of a propaganda stream.
It's the canon of the medical field.
Yeah, well, you've got the highway signs that they put up over the last 15 years to warn of accidents ahead and all this stuff. And all of it now is just telling you social distancing.
Social distance.
I mean, it's just, you don't get away from it. It is. It's like a dogmatic governmental.
Actually, Mr. Condit, I was reading statistics today that was trying to do the tracing. How people got infected with the disease, And the vast, vast majority, 99.9 something percent of the people who actually came down with this, they say, got it, who were social distancing. There was an infinitesimally small number of people who they actually traced to being out and about and getting it out, traveling around out there. That's where the real danger is. And say the number is 66%, they say, of the people in New York who came down with this were actually confined to quarters at home. They were observing the quarantine at home when they were, and that doesn't even, by the way, count those who you say didn't make the call because they didn't want to be whisked off to the hospital. Right. So how many would that counter?
Well, Father, if that's true, if like Mr. Condit says here, if this is really essentially not much worse than a bad flu season, if the social distancing is not effective, why do you continue to implement it at the church here?
Well, I don't know that it is. That it is. Well, first of all, I didn't know it was a high school. It would make perfect sense because the whole idea of social distancing, it seems very, what should I say, it doesn't seem like a medical real.
There's no science involved in that.
It doesn't sound like it, no. But it seems like common sense. Like I think we all do that if somebody's sneezing and hacking and carrying on. We do tend to draw away, don't we?
Sure.
I mean, just common sense. That's why when I got up in the pulpit, I said, look, I'm not speaking as a doctor, but it just seems common sense, that if there's something going around and, you realize it can be transferred by sneezing and droplets in the air, it makes common sense to give space. Besides, Tom, I actually have a certain, what should I say? I can't say that I like the idea of social distancing. I think all conservatives want their space. I think it's natural for conservatives to want their space, okay? So when I think of social distancing, I think in terms of the idea, here we are, okay? We have spread the people out of the church. We've gone from 2 masses to 4 masses at our chapel. What's not to like about that? For any traditional Catholic, to go from 2 masses to 4 masses at their chapel. The priest is willing to to do that. Even old crotchety priests like me, who are barely, seaworthy here on our legs, we're willing to do that for the sake of everybody involved, and for the sake of keeping the wolf away from our door. But how could anybody object to saying, we don't like this, we want to go back to 2 masses? Mm-hmm. I don't know that anybody would reasonably say that. But there are also issues too. I mean, what Catholic would not say, I much prefer to be jammed into the pew with 20 people rather than spread out and have my family together. My family is a family unit together. I'd much rather have this throng of people and my family basically crowded together, or my teenagers off sitting with their friends. I'd much rather have that. For years, I've been trying to get families to sit together at Mass, right? That's the ideal, right? And I have that now. And I think, this is what I was hoping for. And even in the first place, I wish it weren't that with this reason, but I'm glad that the families are coming to Mass together now and sitting together. And so I say, what's not to like about this? And there are a number of other things, too. I mean, there are people who are even saying social distancing is anti-Christian. Social distancing is anti-Catholic. I say, well, tell it to the hermits. Tell it to the anchorites. I mean, tell it to those who, during the persecution of Decius, went off into the deserts, right? What does our Lord say when these times come? He says, don't go into the house, get your things. He said, just take off into the mountains. Our Lord says this, right? We read it last Sunday after Pentecost, first Sunday of Advent, right? We read about these things happening. And so, I think there are certain actual benefits to it. And I have to kind of socially distance my mind from the whole idea of it because it's coming from puerile thought, And medically, I think it's being shown that it is not only nonsense, but it actually hurts our immune system. to be socially distanced from each other, to be locked down, to be hiding under the bed. It's actually not allowing us to keep up with the immunity we need. And so it's weakening our immune systems right now, even as we're doing it. So from a medical point of view, I find it's less and less persuasive. I think it's more and more persuasive that it's doing more harm than good by far, you know. But as I say, from another point of view, I'm glad we have 4 masses in our church right now, even though it's very difficult. And the masses are calm and peaceful, and I think people have actually benefited from attending the masses under these circumstances.
But what about
Personally.
those? What about those who would say that it's a bit of a slippery slope, because here we have this one recommendation, or even a strong recommendation that the government provides for us, and we follow that. What about the next crazy recommendation that they have? Are we going to follow that? And there are also those who say that this kind of gives credence to the hysteria that we've been talking about. It kind of fosters an environment of fear. Here we're saying how this is really essentially no worse than a bad flu season.
I would agree with them all. I think what Mr. Condit said there, quoting Mr. Horowitz, David Horowitz, or maybe it was this other lady who said that the virus is real, the crisis is not.
That was actually my line.
That was what I said.
Mr. Thomas Condit.
I just don't have access to write columns for the whole country.
Well, that's going to go viral. But, I mean, I agree with that. And, but, as I say, I mean, traditional Catholics can react in kind of a knee-jerk reaction that what comes from government, we don't want this, and,
Sure.
This is tyranny and all the rest. I understand that. But if there's something that in itself, let's say, is not necessarily a bad thing, and actually, if we can have 4 masses on a Sunday, and this is the only, I can't imagine any other circumstances under which we could have gotten 4 masses at Immaculate Conception Church during this time. And as I say, I've been trying for years to get the families all to join together and come to Mass and sit together in Mass, and nothing I've tried has worked. So, I'm not in favor of the government tyranny. I'm not in favor of tyranny under any circumstances, under any name, okay? And I want to see that certainly come to an end. If I could keep the 4 masses at our church, and I could reasonably also keep families coming together, I would. Even long after social distancing is just a quaint joke, in the past that people thought would scratch their head and say, I can't believe they got us to do that. But the fact is, insofar as something like this is mandated and used as a weapon against the churches being open and divine worship, I'm totally against it, insofar as it is done by government fiat, unless there is a real honest-to-goodness necessity for it. But they have no right to shut down the churches. They'd have no right to do that, right? Not the traditional Catholic Church. I'll speak for ourselves. I mean, they have no power on heaven or on earth that can justify that. But having said that, let me point out, though, now that we've seen how this is all played out, I mean, the way it was all presented to us was that we were told we had to expect this enormous flood of deathly ill people suddenly crying out in need of help that we couldn't possibly give them. That this was going to be like the Black Plague replayed all over the world, especially in our own country, right? That's what we were told, essentially. And we didn't know. We were told this is a novel virus. The medical community did not know what to expect here. Well, some of them might have known, but not the people I talked to. They were mystified by it too. So now we know. See, now we have the advantage of having seen how this is played out. So when you ask the question, well, what about the slippery slope and what's going to happen next? I think what's going to happen next is people are beginning to understand what's going on here. I think the leftists have really overplayed their hand.
Yeah.
And this is why, I mean, I see the hand of God in all of this. That, yes, we are being punished for our sins, but I also see the hand of God in this too. This is now on the table. This is out patent for everyone to see exactly what the agenda was here. anyone, as I say, has ears to hear, eyes to see, they can see what's going on right now, and they're aware. People who were blissfully unaware just a few weeks ago are becoming very, very much aware of the politics of this. And we have an opportunity here now that perhaps they would not have had before. We have an opportunity to respond to this and get a message across about the spiritual reality here. Mm-hmm. And get people to understand the need for them to pray and the need for them to stop sinning and follow Our Lady's message at Fatima.
Sure.
So I'm hoping that this has been kind of an awakening for people, that they will say, now we know what this was all about, and we're not going to let this happen to us again.
Sure. Okay. Well, perhaps we can wrap up with that. I guess, Mr. Condit, I'll start with you. Any final remarks?
Well, you know, actually, if I may circle really around to the beginning and the issue of this House Bill 6666 and the ramifications of you know, will they come to your homes? Which I think is a serious thing, as I think we've covered as a possibility. I wanted to, since I feel like I've done maybe a little too much political commentary here, but I'm here as a lawyer by invitation, and you know, I've had some interesting experience with cases, Fourth Amendment violations. And if I can just read a couple of things quickly, I just cut a few things out and brought the. So the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons to be seized. Okay, this is the U.S. Supreme Court, in an opinion, a decision back in the 1980s, dealing with entry of the home by police officers, warrantless entries of the home, said it's axiomatic that the physical entry of the home is the chief evil against which the wording of the Fourth Amendment is directed, and a principal protection against unnecessary intrusions into private dwellings is the warrant requirement imposed by the Fourth Amendment on agents of the government who seek to enter the home for purposes of search or arrest. It is not surprising, therefore, that the court has the Supreme Court has recognized as a basic principle of Fourth Amendment law that searches and seizures inside a home without a warrant are presumptively unreasonable. And a search or seizure carried out on a suspect's premises without a warrant is per se unreasonable unless the police can show the presence of exigent circumstances. And they go on to talk about how the purpose of the warrant requirement is so that what the phrase is, a detached and neutral magistrate can assess whether this is necessary, instead of have government agents and bureaucrats and appointees and social workers, whatever, deciding that they, without any judge looking at anything, is going to come to your house not because there's been a crime, right? Not because there's probable cause of a crime or that you possess dangerous things in your house. No, because you might have a virus. Now, this is... The Fourth Amendment stands very tall if this gets serious. The question, will the judges handle these things as the Fourth Amendment has historically been handled? Because if you read the Fourth Amendment in this case law, you can feel very safe in your homes. Mm-hmm. But...
it's almost like the Founding Fathers foresaw or anticipated something like this H.R. 6 coming down the pipe.
And more than that, probably, with King Henry.
Yeah.
But, anyway, there's reason to feel secure under the Fourth Amendment, but stay tuned.
Yeah. Wow.
As you say, I mean, it has to be applied. It has to be, well, we have to fight for it, basically, right? And, you know, you mentioned the legal point of view. I mean, we're apologizing for it, but I do appreciate very much. It's your legal expertise in the subject, legal as a Catholic American who loves the church and loves the church country, has a love for God. Your viewpoint is very much appreciated, Tom, and I know our viewers appreciate that too.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could kind of wrap this up, Tom, too. Okay. For years, I have been trying to convince people there's something going on with the leftists and the communists, and the church has been always very much contrary to the revolutionary, leftists, and I'm trying to get that point across. Very limited opportunity to get through to people. What we're dealing with. This has done it. This has awakened more people to it, and I have not actually, even to this moment, spoken my mind on the whole subject. I'm not, I wouldn't liken myself to St. Thomas more in this, but I've had to show a certain restraint because my concern has to be, above all, having the Mass and the sacraments available for the people, and I can't jeopardize that. But what I expect to happen, what I hope will happen, that when the people break out of this, this situation, and then they've actually restored some normalcy and sanity to life, I expect that the traditional Catholic people and the clergy are going to speak out in a very forceful way and make it very clear exactly what we think of all this. I know I intend to. And I look forward to that moment because it's very difficult. It's been very difficult to hold back, okay? Every now and then you get a little glimmer, of that, frustration. But I do think there's going to be a lot of pushback on this. And I welcome that. People are going to really lay down, really make clear where they stand on this. And they're going to draw a line, and it's not going to be in the sand. So I just hope and pray that when they do that they understand the spiritual dimensions of all this, the spiritual origins of the problem, they apply it to themselves, because the next step will be telling people, look, okay, now you see the gravity of the problem. Now you have to understand the origins. It's in the way you're living your life with your, impurities and blasphemies and obscenities and what entertains you and all the rest. These are the things that you have to give up because this is what's coming. And the only thing that's holding it back is the grace of God right now. So I hope, that they'll be open for that message when the time comes, because that's the second wave right there. That's the one that they have to be hit with. Mm-hmm. Like, why did this happen to us in the first place? This is a gentle warning from heaven. And I hope people will take that warning.
Sure.
And if I may make a final comment in response to that, and I'm not saying this to ingratiate myself to Father, but we've been in touch through the whole thing, I think he just handled it brilliantly. The people here at Immaculate Conception probably can appreciate it. Viewers from around the country and the world aren't. They're not here. But I think Father has brilliantly handled the thing just throughout the whole the handling of Mass and everything.
Well,
he could not possibly be criticized by anybody.
Yeah.
He couldn't be.
Yeah.
So, Father,
Well, as a matter of fact,
You'd be surprised.
but let's just say that's why I wanted you on the show.
Yeah.
So I knew you would say that.
That's okay.
Wow.
That's really what this is all
All
about.
right. Well, you couldn't reasonably be criticized. How's that? Okay.
That's good. That's good. Well, one final thing before we end the program tonight. We have the month of June coming upon us, which is the month of the Sacred Heart, and our wonderful Lady Sodality here at Immaculate Conception, our Lady of Perpetual Help Sodality. They have put together these Sacred Heart bumper stickers or bumper magnets, I guess you would call them. So we have a couple different styles here that maybe I could hold up for the camera here. This first one, My Jesus Mercy, very beautiful round magnet here, and we also have the smaller rectangle one. Oh Jesus, meek and humble of heart, make my heart like unto thine. These are wonderful products that Our Lady of Perpetual Help Sodality has put together. They've I think actually become quite the hit. Father, I know every time I pull up to Immaculate Conception here, I see them on nearly all of the bumpers of the vehicles in the parking lot. So the Lady Sodality has plenty of these car magnets available. They are ready and willing to ship them out to you. If any of our viewers would like to make a purchase of these, we can place the information in the description below. Perhaps we can place the website on the screen now. But if anyone is interested in those, I would heartily recommend those. And I know you would as well, Father. I guess they would, we can put all the information here, but I believe it's the Our Lady of Perpetual Help website, which would be, I guess, Our Lady of Perpetual Help .weebly.com. And we can place that on the screen now and put that in the information.
Or could they send it to the What Catholics Believe website and you would pass it on?
They can, yeah, that would work as well. I can get them in contact with the Sodality, and we can go from there. But yeah.
And can I add what I know about it is firsthand from one of the leaders? This is not a fundraiser. They want to get these out there to honor and increase devotion to the Sacred Heart.
Definitely.
It'll be donations for cost or something is the spirit of it.
Yeah, they're very cheap. If I remember correctly, I want to say they're $3 a magnet.
I think so.
I believe for both styles. So definitely more than reasonable. But all right. Well, with that, Mr. Condit, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. You're welcome anytime. So we'd love to have you back on. Father Jenkins, thank you as well. Thank you both for being here.
Certainly.
Yep.
And thank you.
Thanks to all of our viewers as well for watching this episode of What Catholics Believe. Until next time, we ask that you all remember the words of Our Lady at Fatima, to consecrate yourselves and your families to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and to pray and do penance. Thank you, and God bless you.